Okay, so today we are going to be looking at the GoPro Max and how to set the best settings, especially in a low light situation. In bright daylight, really, you can set the min ISO and max ISO to 100, maybe a max of 200, and the camera can just do its own thing. On particularly bright days, I prefer having an EV of -1. And interestingly enough, in really low light, I like to have an EV of -2 to be able to get the best picture plus the least amount of motion blur. However, there's also another trick that we can do, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's setting the shutter to 1/240 and then finding the right ISO so that you can still get a good image, but without all the motion blur from moving the camera around. Now, of course, if the camera is not going to be moving, then you can use a much lower ISO and allow for the camera to use a much slower shutter. But unfortunately, if your shutter isn't set to at least 1/120, which is pretty quick, then you're going to get a lot of motion blur. The best setting that I found is really 1/240. Of course, for the absolute least amount of motion blur, you would want the 1/480. However, in low light, 1/480 is usually unattainable. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn on the max, which I've done, and just tap on the LCD here. Now, we have it's pretty good overcast, somewhat rainy day today, early morning, and I'm under some tree cover, so we should be able to get some adjustment necessary for our low light here, so that we can still get that good picture but without very much motion blur. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and tap on the 360 video and then the little pencil so I can go into my settings. From here, I'm going to go to my shutter, and I'm going to take that shutter and move it all the way up to 1/480. Now, at 1/480, the ISO min of 100 is going to be much too low. Now, ISO max is automatically set to 1600, but I want to try to bring this down as much as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the ISO max, and I'm going to just start moving it down until I get to a point where it's just too dark. So down at 100, too dark. 200, a little bit better. 400, it's starting to brighten up. 800, it's looking pretty good. And then 1600 and 3200, those are getting too bright. So let's go ahead and we're going to say 800 is where I want the max ISO. Now that's with the shutter of 1/480. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to my shutter. I'm going to set this now to 1/120. Now this is the minimum shutter that I absolutely want to have. So now I'm going to go back over to my ISO max again, and then I'm going to start adjusting. And 400 was okay, 100's too dark, 200's a little better, 400 seems to be just about right. But I think I might even be able to get away with 200 here. So I'm going to go with 200. So what I'm going to do is I have 200 as the lowest number, and then I had 800 as my max number. So we'll go ahead and put this back on 800. And then I'm going to come over to my min, and I'm going to move that up to 200. Now from here, I'm going to go into my shutter again, and I'm going to move that shutter up one notch to 1/240. Now with these settings, I'm going to allow the ISO to be able to fluctuate as the camera sees fit, but with my shutter locked at 1/240, I'm going to be able to get a good image without a lot of motion blur on it. Now I like to also drop my sharpness to medium, and that's just a preference, and then everything else we're going to keep the same. Except for, let's see, my white balance. I do like to set my white balance manually. So let's see, in the 500s, it's too red. I think 4500 looks about right. 4000 is too low. Let's go with 4500. Okay, and so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to extend the pole. and let's take some test shots. Okay, so now I am recording with the GoPro Max and with the settings that I just created. That is the ISO min of 200, ISO max of 800, and a shutter of 1/240. And then I'm gonna just whip the camera around. Hello, kitty, say hi. And whipping the camera. So that was a pretty big move there. Just rotating the camera around, and we'll see what does this look like, and are we getting a lot of motion blur as I move the camera around. So right up to the spider web, and we'll move it back down. Now, just for comparison, I'm going to put the settings into the Protune default, and then we'll see if there is much of a difference between Protune default and then what we just did. Okay, so now we're just in Protune default, straight out of the camera, no changes, and we'll do some of the same movements. So whip it down to the kitty. Hi, kitty. How are you, buddy? And we can do some spinning around a little here. Maybe back up to the tree. And come back down. Okay, and so now we have the ISO min and max set to 100. So this should be forcing a shutter that's going to be a little bit slower. And then we're going to do one more test where we actually purposely set the shutter slower. Probably do the 180-degree rule where we'll set it to 1/60 if we can. So let's go ahead and move the camera down. Hello, kitty. How are you? And we'll come up in the tree. Come back down. Do a little moving around. And so how did that look, and what was the motion blur like on this? So were we able to accomplish less noise or grain, but were we compromised in doing so by getting more motion blur as we moved around? Okay, so now we have the shutter set to 1/60, which would be the 180-degree angle rule, which is that we're doubling the shutter to our frame rate. So how does this look? And we'll go ahead and move the camera around. Hello, kitty. Say hello. And are we getting substantial motion blur now that we have gone with this setting? Up into the tree. So anyway, how did that look? Okay, so now we have gone with the Protune defaults again, but we set an EV of -2, and we'll see how this looks. Whip the camera down. Say hello, kitty. Hello, buddy. We'll bring it back up, and we'll see how much motion blur we're getting here. Now the EV -2, what we expect to be happening with this is that we are getting a forced faster shutter. Oh, here's an interesting dark spot we can do some tests on. So I'm going to run through all these again, but then we're going to be able to test it deep inside of this tree. So this is kind of a cool shot. So we can bring it up, and then we can bring it back down into the darkness. And we'll whip it all the way up and back to me. Okay, so now we have our shutter on auto, but our ISO max at 800, ISO min at 200, white balance set to 4500, and our sharpness is on medium with an EV of -2. So we're gonna take a look at this, drop it down into the tree, and back up. Come through, and then we're gonna whip it all the way around and then back again. Okay, and so now we are doing our settings with the shutter at 1/240. The EV is on 0. The ISO min is 200, max is at 800. So we'll see how this looks. So we'll go ahead and drop this down into the tree. And then back down and through, and whip it around back to me again. Okay, and now we have the Protune defaults on the GoPro Max. And so we'll bring it around, go down into the tree, come back up. Back around again, and then whipping it around and then back to me. Okay, so now we have a white balance of 4500 and sharpness at medium, but what we've done is we have spot metered to a bright spot on the screen up to the sky and then lock that exposure. And so we'll take a look at this. Now here, I would expect it to get pretty dark because it's locked exposure to that really bright area. And we'll bring it up, over, back through again, whip it back to me. Okay, so now what we've done is we have used the exposure value, but what I've done is I didn't lock it, so it's just to a point at the bottom of the screen, dead center. So as I move the camera around, it should be adjusting to the different light. So we'll go ahead and we will test this out. So now the exposure is on the lens that's facing towards the tree. So as I go down, it should definitely be opening up that exposure, and I can see how much brighter that is. And then we can bring it back up. And you can see it really adjusting to wherever that lens is pointing. So by contrast, if I point the lens that has the exposure compensation chosen, if I point that up as I drop it now into the darkness of this tree, it shouldn't be nearly as bright, although it might have a little bit of brightness to it. But we'll go ahead and we'll turn it around. We'll drop it down in, and then we'll whip it back to me, and then we'll just see what that motion blur is like. So anyway, hope that helps you out, and if it does, please leave a like, or you can leave a dislike. Either way, please leave a comment letting me know what you like, what you didn't like, and what kind of videos I can make for you in the future. Plus, I am desperately trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and right now we're at about 184, I think was last check. Anyway, so I need about, what is that, 819 more subscribers. So if you can, please subscribe. And if you know anybody who's interested in 360 cameras, or more specifically the GoPro Max, or really any GoPro camera, I have just about all of them, so I can do videos on those as well, plus on just about all the accessories. Then leave me a note what you'd like to see and let them know about this channel, and I will do my best to make those videos and to help you out the best I can. Anyway, take care, and until next time, bye bye.